Sorry, I think I just hit a file size limit there. The washer needs to go into this space. There it is. I'll line that up with the hole. And I'm still doing this with my finger holding the shutter release button up from the underneath, the other side of the camera. Let's get this screw in place. Let's pop that back in place for the moment. I will make it my business to put the top cover on this camera before I lose the shutter release once again. Okay, let's see if the door opens and closes. Yep, that's fine. Okay, so far so good. I will put the top cover in place, I think. No, I won't. I'll put the camera to one side. We'll clean up the top cover, clean up the rangefinder, and close the camera body up. Right, so cleaning this up. Let's start here. I'm going to remove the accessory shoe. It doesn't look particularly dirty, but typically you get a layer of sponge underneath the shoe. Clean the shoe and the body. This is quite clean, but you can see that pattern around there. That's where from dust or moisture or skin oils or whatever, something has got under the edge there. Dust has got under the edge there. It's just created a little paste in an ideal position for the corrosion to start, and that will be corrosion that's setting in there, no doubt about it. And it's because of the filth that gets underneath. So this mask I'm taking off here holds the viewfinder glasses into the front of the camera body. Now, there's nothing holding those in there now except filth. That's just dirt and oil and other rubbish that's holding those in position. So those two pieces of glass need to be cleaned. This frame needs to be cleaned, and the top cover needs to be cleaned. Now, there's nothing left in the top cover now except the eyepiece. That doesn't unscrew. Don't try to unscrew it. You'll just end up with a lot of problems. That's staked in place. It doesn't come out. You've got to clean the inside glass surface there by poking in with a cotton bud from the front. So it's lucky you've got no glass in here at the moment. It's easily done and it works well. So this I've got to clean down with a bit of naphtha and a cotton bud. Likewise this. The glass I'll clean with glass cleaner, and then I'll put that back together. The shoe of course gets cleaned in the same way as the top cover, and all of this just takes about 5 minutes, and then that'll be ready to put aside. And the last thing I'll need to do on the body before that goes on, of course, will be to look at the rangefinder, which apparently has been serviced, but we don't know how well. Well, there it is, back together. That glass is now sparkly and clean, as you can see, and that'll be fine. There wasn't much dirt to clean out anywhere. That was all quite clean, really. I'll put that to one side, because before I do anything with that, I've got to do this rangefinder. The rangefinder looks quite clean. I know it's not adjusted correctly. I'm going to have a fairly close inspection of it. Semi-silvered mirror's got some dust on it probably. Front surface here has got a fingerprint on there, but I might have done that. And there's a blob of crud on the prism at this end. So it's not... the overall impression is that it's probably about 90% clear, a little bit of haze. So let's have it apart. Stretch out the spring and remove the pin. This screw there is in a very unmolested condition. They're difficult to get loose on a good day. This one is very, very tight, and it's hard to believe that someone's had that off in recent times. Oh. No, they haven't. This is looks like someone's put a drop of oil or something on there. I don't think it was removed first. So all that oil, that inevitably would have vaporised and settled itself onto the optical surfaces. So that'll have to be cleaned off. The glass is relatively clean now, but that would certainly make a mess of it. Right, so what I normally do, yeah, this is all very oily. What I normally do is make a little mark across here so that I can put that brass bush back in exactly the same position, because having a slot in it like that, it sort of acts a little bit like an eccentric. And I've got to wipe this oil off before I get, yeah, there's a lot of dried grease here, and then oil's been put on the top of it by the looks of it to make it move. Yeah, I really want to get all that clean. And the body here, likewise, that's a bit of a mess. Just use some naphtha to mop up this oil. That's very very greasy. That's, I don't know what that was. It looks to me like the original grease had dried out and someone had put a squirt of oil in there to get it to move. This might take a couple of shots in the cleaner to clean this, because there'll be a lot of oil floating around and they'll tend to contaminate surfaces as quick as I'm cleaning them. Right, so I'm going to remove the prism first. We've got two small screws. They both hold this prism in, and they'll serve to make our vertical adjustments. This mask at the front needs to come off, because I know from experience that if you put that in the ultrasonic cleaner will clean the paint right off it. That's got a little bit of a shine to it. I suspect that's oily. We'll have to clean that manually. The semi-silvered mirror, now we can see that, and it's got dust on it. I can't tell whether it's on one or both surfaces. The rear eyepiece glass here, I'll just remove that mask. You can see the oil underneath there. See that shiny bit? That's oil. Shouldn't be any oil anywhere near the set. Seeped up around the edges of that glass. If that glass was clean now, it would stay clean for about 5 minutes with all that oil about, because what would happen is basically the oil would just wick across the surfaces till everything had a nice dusty oily sheen. Alright, well, I'm going to clean this in the ultrasonic cleaner. Normally I just clean it in a small glass with some hot water and normal domestic dish soap, and that gets rid of any haze on that semi-silvered mirror. But given the amount of oil that's floating around on these metal surfaces, that oil will contaminate the water, and I may have to run this through twice in order to get rid of all the contamination. I've just got some naphtha on here. I'm just wiping around these surfaces to get rid of the oil that I can get rid of. Right, I'll get that into the ultrasonic cleaner and I'll come back when it's nice and clean. Well, it's about 40 minutes later and a lot of cleaning cycles, and yeah, it was entertaining trying to get the oil off that. I really don't know what had happened to that. There were certainly lots of traces of old dried grease, so that had never been cleaned out and replaced with anything new. But the liquid oily stuff that was in there was very thin and very clear, and it sort of makes me think that possibly something like WD-40 may have been given a splash in there, or some very light, thin, clear oil. But whatever it was the wrong thing. The black frames here you can see now, you'll probably notice that they've got a bit of a dull look to them. That was supposed to have a dull look to it. It was shiny before. Now that shine was the oil that was covering all the surfaces. When I cleaned the rangefinder body in the ultrasonic cleaner in hot water with dish soap as usual, I had to do the body 3 times to get rid of all the oil that was obviously still about the place. The first time I pulled it out and rinsed it under the tap, you could see the water would just sit on the surface in beads, which tells me that that surface was not clean and it was still oily. So it needed to be done again and again and to get it all clean. But the rangefinder's fine. Apart from that, I mean, it's in good condition. The silvering's all great. The glass looks nice and clear now. It moves smoothly. I don't think there'll be any problem with that at all. It was just a bit more work than probably should have been. However, it's all done now, and that's the main thing. So I'll put that on the camera body. Now normally I put a couple of drops of lacquer under the rangefinder just so it doesn't have any tendency to wander if the camera gets dropped. These cameras often do get dropped, and because the rangefinder's not held with dowels or anything to the top of the camera, it's just held on with screws. There's a certain amount of play around those screws, and there's more than enough play around those screws that rangefinder can shift quite easily. Certainly easily enough that you will lose whatever adjustment you thought you'd arranged. So we'll get that in place now. That should be good. Now actually, before I go mad, I think I better degrease these screws too, because if they've been holding the rangefinder down, they'll have also been coated in that oil. Yeah, I think you can see the colour that came off those. And I don't want to put back in place something with a big puddle of oil on it, which will then make it its business to transfer to other surfaces as soon as my back is turned. That's one. Get its mate in place. Now normally I just push the rangefinder back towards the back of the camera body, making sure it's nice and square with the body, and do the screws up tight. Check that the rangefinder arm moves smoothly with the focus, and it appears to, and now I can check out the window and see what my adjustments are like. Here we're a mile away at the infinity position. Undo that lock screw, swing that arm forward, and check and see what we've got. too far. I've gone too far there. Swing back the other way slightly. These adjustments are very subtle. You can spend a lot of time going backwards and forwards until you get it right. That's just life. Don't lose any sleep over it. Just do it until you're done. It's the nature of an adjustment like this that if you think you might have moved it, you've probably gone too far. I'm well away there. I'm looking out the window at what's effectively an infinity target. On a ridge across from me, there are a couple of power poles, and they make a marvellous target for adjusting rangefinders. Because of course they're a very high contrast image against the sky, and I can judge quite well whether those images converge just as I get to the point where the focus scale ring has reached the infinity stop or not. Yeah, I must be right on it, I've just gone past it. Oh, that's bang on. Of course, it might not stay bang on because as soon as I do the lock screw, that might shift it. No, that's good. Okay, so my infinity focus is very good. I've got to check my close focus and check that that's okay as well. The close focus adjustment is done at this end of the arm. And basically it changes the angle of the arm that contacts that screw head. And by changing the angle of that arm, it changes its effective length as it swings through an arc. And believe me, it's very tedious getting your adjustments right, because as soon as you touch the close focus adjustment, you have shifted the infinity end adjustment automatically. So you've got a balance between the two. It can take a long time. That all appears to be very good. So I'm going to put the top cover on here while the going's good, I think. Just run that screw out. You notice I've got the film advance at a 90-degree angle in the rest position. That's an ideal spot to be doing that. There's our return spring for the film release button, can go in there. That's the slightly smaller diameter, slightly longer spring. If you've mixed them up, you'll discover that the other spring doesn't fit down there, and you'll find that's a bother and a nuisance. Right, so everything else is in place. Let's put the top cover on. Don't press down the film release button when you're getting the cover top in place, because if you do, it'll release the film advance and it won't be where you started off. Right, let's get that on there. I'm a bit. That's not running very smoothly. Why not? Oh, that sounds right. Okay. So now something is tight there, and it shouldn't be tight. Oh, the top cover wasn't down properly. That's better. Our frame counter's not moving. Let's fix that top cover down while the going's good, and then sort out the film advance, I think. One thing to be aware of when you're working on a Retina IIa or IIa camera is that the chrome screws on this top cover are quite short compared with the chrome screws used on other models. And if you use a long one, it sticks through the side here and jams up the film advance mechanism. Here's our spacer. That sounds right. Okay, so frame counter's all working nicely. That's all working. What about, does it stop at number 1? That's what we're interested in. Yep, locks at frame number 1. That's exactly as it should do. I'll just move that alignment slightly. Good. And the rewind knob. We can get the rewind knob back together, I suppose, and get that on the camera. Okay, so there's not much to this, of course. I'll just put the screw on the end of that tool. Here's our wavy washer. Now, this camera is in fine condition. There's no corrosion to speak of here anywhere. It's really good. That's not necessarily what you'll discover in most cases. It's not uncommon for there to be corrosion with a wavy washer like that, because just because it's steel, it's any spring steel tends to have a high carbon content. It tends to make them prone to corrosion. Okay, that's good. I'll get this leatherette glued down on the base of the camera now, and that's the camera body dealt with after that. And I can turn my attention to dealing with the shutter and lens assembly. And let's hope that I find nothing unusual about that. Now here on the leather at the base, we've got Zeiss bumps here and here corresponding to those two screws. I can see the lumps of crud here in the leather, so I've got to scrape that out. Sometimes you can get other spots where there'll be corrosion, but that's the only two spots we've got in this case. Alright, that looks good. I'll wipe down the base of that camera with a bit of naphtha, put some glue on that leather, and get that leather back down. In here I'm A lot of what I'm removing here is grease that I might have transferred to that with my fingers as I've been handling the camera while I've been servicing it. Because that's what tends to happen. Right. I'll get a bit of paper to get this adhesive on, I think. That'll do. Well, that's a bit generous. Lucky I didn't squirt that straight onto the leather. Okay, so just want to transfer this to the leather. And a nice even coat, and if there's any delaminating you want to get the adhesive into the laminations so that the whole lot sticks back down nicely. This is probably not going to want to sit down dead flat where those ice bumps were. Got to make sure I've got good glue coverage at those points in particular. And make sure you've got good glue coverage to the edges, because when stuff peels up, it doesn't peel up from the middle, it peels up from the edges. The edges are the points that need to be stuck down really well. And I'm going to put a touch on those two screw heads, because that's where those ice bumps had formed. And if I can get the leather to glue down tight to those spots, then they'll lie down flat, otherwise they probably won't. Okay, so that leather's lying in nicely now. Make sure it's round that button cleanly, and I might give that a wipe with naphtha just to make sure that that's the case. You don't want a lot of adhesive going around that button, because otherwise it'll tend to stick. That looks fine. Let's put that surround on there. 2 screws. These are quite short. They're shorter than the equivalent screws from a Retina IIIc, for example. So if you've taken screws from the base of a Retina IIIc tripod socket with the intention of using them for this, they probably won't have enough thread to do the job properly, and even if they did, they'd stick out too far and catch the mechanism under you. So be aware of that. Okay, so those 2 ice bumps, I'm not sure that leather's going to lie flat enough to keep them dead flat, but they're vast improvement over what they were. Alright. That's our camera body dealt with. Shutter and lens assembly next. Can only hope that this hasn't been WD-40'd or oiled or anything. Just take those shims off. The rear grip should unscrew. Oh, it doesn't want to come loose with my fingers. The front does, however. That's nice and loose. Probably too loose. That's just a trim ring. It's not a spacer or anything. Right, I'll get a tool to remove that rear grip.